Seriously? That's all it took? Crying out loud. All right. Is the sound okay? The balance of the guitar and the talking and all that? Oh, I always forget. It takes like 10 seconds for answers. Okay. Well, I guess I will proceed. Great. Okay. Well, I'll just keep an eye on the feed and let me know if it gets wonky. The guitar is not clipping on my monitors. Beautiful. All right. Cool. All right. Thanks, guys. And thanks for your patience. And if you're watching this after the fact, I'll try to just keep it moving. So yeah, I can use my wrist. It's very exciting. I've been wearing this ridiculous brace, like a cast you can take on and off, but it's cool now. Bar chords and other kinds of things with this kind of motion, not as cool yet. So I gotta kind of watch it, but kind of amazing. I actually keep playing the guitar. Okay, so I'm going to spend the first 20 minutes or so going over three main arranging ideas. I'm going to look at the vamp because both versions of the tune have a vamp, and had some questions about turnarounds and chord substitutions, which I'll get to in the back half of the lesson. But the vamp is a big part of playing this tune, partly because it's only an 8-bar song, right? So you need some stuff to do. And partly because the vamp allows you to kind of be a little more inventive and play a little more fast and loose with the chord changes. Then we'll look at some shout chorus ideas, some ways to set off your improvisation with some chord hits and different things. And there were some questions about diminished chords and the voicings that I was using in the improvisation lessons. And if I don't end up covering that when I talk about the shout chorus, I'll get to that in the back half as well, because I wrote down a bunch of questions, because there were some really good ones this month. Well, there's always good ones, but there were some ones that I definitely want to get to. And then the third idea I'm going to look at is something I was doing just now, the idea of dropping out the bass altogether or going to a halftime bass. And we've talked a little bit about stop time before, but this idea of just doing kind of an improvisation where you are letting the notes that you're choosing, the individual lines you're playing, spell out the chords rather than relying on the bass or the chord progression, what's going on in the thumb to spell it out. That's kind of, well, more on that when we get to that. And then I've got questions I'm going to answer. And just so you know what's coming up, and if you have something related to this, or you just want to sort of say, yeah, that's what I want to know too, I'll be starting off the question and answer part talking about how to alter the arrangement to support a vocal. So what do you take out? What do you leave in? What do you change when you're going to use the alternating thumb style to play for singing, your own singing probably. Questions about why A minor 6 and E7 voicings aren't called diminished chords. A really good question from Anton about thinking in terms of chord and scale degrees rather than note names as a way to know the fingerboard. That could take the rest of the hour, so I'll see how much I talk about that. And then there were some questions about the turnaround and right hand like nails and being able to improvise further up the neck and avoiding the F chord. That was you, Ben. So I'll try to get to that. And then finally, just something about the improvisation videos. So here we go. All right. So in the main difference between the vamp in the fundamental and the embellished version. God, I can't talk today. Is that in the fundamental version we're sitting on the one chord, except for that bass line, which kind of implies an E chord for half a bar, but it's basically sitting on A minor. And then when we get to sorry, I just had a moment of like wondering if everything was still running, and so I'm going to make sure that it is. Because now I'm a little paranoid. we still going? Yeah, we're still going. All right. Yes, we're still going. Okay. All right. So the main thing that I pointed out in the fundamental version was that we're doing this kind of articulation of like making the chords really pop. And you can go back and check out the exercises that talk about that. But the idea is you're sitting just on the one chord, whereas in the embellished version, we're doing this thing where we're walking around. And we're basically looking at this as 1 to 5 to 1 to 5. But getting this bass line that goes up and down like that. So here's the 1 chord, here's the 5 chord, E7, here's the 1 chord again, and here's the 5 chord again. So that's one really characteristic way to do the vamp. But you could also, there are ways you could really dress up just sitting on the 1 chord. Instead of this bass going like this, you could put in some blues licks on top. And you've got to sort of deal with what's going on the 4th string. And if you are clever about it, you can make sure that there's always a note to play on the 4th string. So if you play in the open position, so there's coming down the blues scale. Now we got the open E string, and we're back on the chord. So anything like that. So you can play the vamp. Right, so it gives you a way to kind of add to that basic vamp just by putting some licks in. And again, I'm just using an A blues scale. Root, flat 3, 4, flat 5, 5, and maybe 6 or maybe flat 7, which belongs in the scale, is the flat 7, and then the root. And so I did a lesson on the YouTube channel almost 3 years ago about something I call faking the 4th string, where if you want to not totally be tied to the open position, you can basically damp the 4th string with whatever you've got going on, middle finger, ring finger, index finger, something, so that you're playing the bass just as like a percussive effect. And so the finger's resting on the string but not pressing down. And this lets you play out of position, out of open position. And if you're in position, you can grab that chord, right? But that lets you not worry so much. And you can practice this just by making this chord form and maybe this shape, and just trying to get because that lets you get around a little bit more. And also, if you're thinking of this as 1, 5, 1, then really the bass can go like this. Root, 5th on the A, root, flat 7 on the E, which lets you have an open string here. So once this stuff gets up to tempo, you don't really hear what's going on. You don't really hear all the fakery that's happening in the bass, right? So if you're doing the vamp, anyway, that's a bit of a side note, but just if you're going to start putting licks on top, you don't want to feel completely tied to the open position. That technique is not a bad one to work on. So that's just sitting on the 1, and in the exercises section of this month, I went into some detail about the 1 and the 5 and the 1. But another possibility for a vamp is to go 1, 4. So you could have a whole bar of 1 and a whole bar of 4. And we're kind of borrowing that from the part of the tune where we're going like in bar 6, I think. Right, so it's not like a traditional chord to play there, but it's one that will work in this in the arrangement. So if you have 1, I'm using the same idea of like doing a chord vamp, 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and the idea is that the bass is doing this, and like what's what's your horn section doing on top? Like, ba-da-da-da-da, right? Like it's supposed to be like that. So you're thinking just with these top 2 notes, right? And then whenever the thumb can come along, because that's where it is at the moment, it can. So you've got that, but now we're going to D7 with the F sharp in the bass. And then there's any number of ways you can walk back up and use that little moment on beats 3 and 4 to get back. And then you're into the tune. Now, as long as you're going to go like this, you could harmonize those. Right, so now I'm using a G7, my favorite G7 voicing, the root and the flat 7 and the root and the 3rd. Or I guess I'm just keeping the, let's see, what have I got on top? Oh yeah, I've got the 3rd of the chord, the open B string on top. And then I'm going to that with a G sharp in the bass and the root and the 5th. So common tone on top, but the bass and the voicing are moving underneath, which is always cool. So that comes back from like our shout chorus stuff about common tone and guide tone line and all that. So we've got a chromatic thing happening in the bass, but on top, now on these last 2 chords, common tone on top while the bass moves. The common tone being the B. So and you don't have to use that chord, those chords all the time, right? So you can have then spread it out, you could have a four, that's like a 2-measure vamp, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But you could make it a 4-bar cycle because it's the intro. It's not part of the song. So you're kind of at liberty to do what you want with it. Oops, sorry, the guitar neck's getting lost. So now I've got a bar of A minor, D7, G7, E over G sharp. And a little bass line to take you back. So that just gives you, again, like you don't have to throw in the kitchen sink. You don't have to use all of this all the time. But if you've done if you've done just like a vamp like this for the intro, then you get done with the tune. Interlude between coming back to the form again, or into a solo or whatever. So that's a totally different color to use for a vamp. So boy, I always end up spending more time than I thought on each thing. Let's move on to shout chorus stuff. So the idea behind the shout chorus, again, is it's an idea borrowed from like 30s big bands, like things like Count Basie and Fletcher Henderson and stuff like that, where it's a way to kind of break up the solo in an ensemble. Like, with a big band, you've got like 18 people sitting there, and one person soloing for 32 bars kind of doesn't take advantage of the format. You've got all these people sitting around. They could be doing stuff. They could be playing backgrounds behind the solo, or they could be doing like a statement that sets up something for the soloist to respond to, or vice versa. So on the guitar, instead of thinking like, oh, I got to fill up all this space with my improvising, 8 bars and then 8 bars and then 8 bars, you can create these little sort of obstacle courses for yourself. And so if the first 4 bars are you could play some chord hits. You don't even really have to play the F chord, right? So just A minor 6, E7, A minor 6. And then again, here we're just doing like a chromatic step in and then to the E7. More on those chords in just a second, but the sound is you've got the and then improvise or play the melody. And then here's the trick, right? What you do now is you repeat the first 4 bars. So that now it sounds like a part, like a kind of orchestrated thing you worked out. Right? And then a different little solo break. So what I'm doing, I'm playing this kind of abbreviated voicing, right? And I'm trying to get out of open position, and because there's a sort of a melodic thing I want to get. I want to kind of play up here so that when I improvise down here, there's some contrast in register, right, between playing up here and playing down here. So I'm grabbing this A minor 6 chord, but I'm not even grabbing the full chord. I'm just getting the 4th string, so my thumb has a place to go, and that's the 6th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of an A minor chord. So here's 6, and here's flat 3, same as this note, C natural. And then I'm just grabbing the high string, A. And that's enough to tell you it's an A minor 6 chord. So we've got A minor 6, and then E7 with the root and the 5th and the flat 7 and the 3rd. And I'm using basically the same rhythm I was doing down here for my vamp. Well, it's similar. It starts right on the downbeat. So it's really just those two chords. And then using the open high string instead of playing it here. And then, so that's 4 bars, and then going into so that's one way to think about the shout chorus. Another way is just to think, and there are two things you can do, two main things you can sort of organize the shout chorus around. One is keeping a common tone, right? Like keeping a note, keeping as close to one note as possible as the chords shift underneath. So that's as close as we can stay on top, the root of A and the third of E, because they don't really share. We could keep an E on top, right? And that is the exact same note. So in open position, you could have an A minor triad on top, and then an E7 chord on top, an E7 chord after that. So they share the note E on top, and or E7 with the high string ringing out. Or even, or E7 with the flat 13. If you want a completely common tone thing on top. But now, if you want to have direction on top, that's sort of the other way you can go with the guide tone line. The idea of the other way you can go with a shout chorus is to have a guide tone line. Said that backwards. But so you can. Can you go up or and then you could also come down. And what those voicings are is I'm basically alternating between an A minor chord with the 6th added. So here's A minor, and I put the 6th on top. Here's A minor on the top 3 strings, and there's where the 6th belongs. And then here's another one, root 5th, 6th, and flat 3rd. And finally, flat 3rd, 6th, root 5th. So all of those work for the one chord, and then in between you can put any of these, which yes look like diminished chords, but what they are also is E7 chords with the flat 9 added. So taking the root and raising it a half step. So we take this E7 chord, flat 7, 3, 5, root, and put the flat 9 on top. And then here's an E7 chord. This would be the root, but we're going to raise it a half step. So now that's E7 with a flat 9. Here's another E7 voicing. 3, 7, root, and 5. It's the deep river blues chord, right? And we're going to raise the root a half step. And finally, E7, right? Delta blues chord, 5th, root, 3rd, and flat 7. But take the root and raise it to the flat 9, or like that. So all of these are E7 chords with the flat 9 added, all of which sound good as the 5 in the key of A minor. Adding the flat 9 makes the 7th just sound more 7th-y. So that means we have A minor 6, E7 flat 9, A minor 6, E7 flat 9, A minor 6, E7 flat 9, A minor 6. which means if we like to rock between the 1 and the 5 for the vamp, or even for parts of the tune, right? Because it's it's built into bars 1 and 2, and then built into sort of built into bars 5 and 6, not quite as definitively, and any of the vamps we're doing. So now we have all this place to go, right? We've got that gives us tons of shout chorus stuff, tons of, like you can even improvise with this as your solo. And it just gives you chords and melodic stuff on top. That's the melody. And then supported by the chords. And as long as you're covering all 4 of the top strings, the thumb can just do its thing. And you got tons of stuff to do. So let me pause there. And there was a question specifically about this that I want to address, if I can. Because Ben said, how to make this A minor vamp different from one you'd use for House of the Rising Sun. I was having a lot of trouble making them sound different. So do I, because it's a lot of the same sounds, right? I don't remember off the top of my head exactly exactly what I was doing. Let's see. Oh, that's right. With the House of the Rising, it's the same groove and it's the same key. So, if you really want to start distinguishing them, you could start looking at like the tempo and doing something different melodically on top that kind of borrows from the melody of the tune. In this case, I think we were doing more of a suspended thing, which ends up really working out to be A minor 7 to A minor 6, and then really a kind of B minor 7, only with the E in the bass, to either, you can either think of it as B minor 7 to E7, or you can think of it as an E sus. Here's the suspension, here's the 4th, going down to the 3rd. So, which is a little bit different feel. So I don't know if that really answers the question. There isn't that much difference, and so one would need to work out some way. If you're going to play those two as like repertoire pieces back to back, you'd need to work out a way to kind of distinguish them a little bit. And I would say the first place to go is to the melody, and try to see if you can grab a fragment of the melody or a fragment of the turnaround or something, and kind of make that like a thematic thing so that it feels a little different. And do as I say, not as I'm actually doing right now. Here's another question, and then I will get to some written questions that I've got from before. And here's Henriette. Hello. Do you know better the intervals on the fretboard, the name of the note, and know the intervals? Oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what, see how I did this? Exactly what Anton asked. I don't actually know it all perfectly, but I can explain a bit about how I learned the fingerboard. And that's actually on my list of things to do. If there aren't any immediate questions about the arranging stuff I just talked about, I want to get into these first few questions, and which are about playing to accompany singing, and a little more about the diminished chords. I sort of answered that, but I want to be more specific. And then I'll get to this question, because it was the third thing I was going to talk about the fingerboard and intervals versus note names and all that kind of stuff. So that's a good question. Okay, so St. James Infirmary. If you're going to do this as an accompaniment to singing rather than as an accompaniment to a guitar melody that you're also playing at the same time. Right, this is the melody. Now, if you're going to take away the melody because you're going to sing it, you still want to have a groove, right? And the groove is what happens between the thumb and the fingers, right? Because the bass on itself, I mean, there's a pulse there, but the distinction of whether it's a swing eighth feel or a straight eighths feel, as opposed to that, is coming between how the index finger, in this case, is articulating the offbeats, the ands. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And that conveys the swing feel that we're playing the song with, as opposed to 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, which would convey a straight eighths feel, which we're not using. So I would start looking for a way to just groove without spelling out the melody. And I want to stay out of the register of the voice, I think, unless I'm playing fills. So this is overly simplistic, but you could say, well, I'm just going to stick to the bottom 4 strings, right? And so there's more of that kind of faking the 4th string, right? Because I'm not playing this. I'm not letting it ring out. Right? I've got my palm muting going. And so the bass notes are a little drier. Because that's, again, I'm still thinking of this as an accompaniment to a melody. Just now I'm thinking of an accompaniment to a vocal melody as opposed to a guitar melody. And there are 2 main things that I can do with my index finger. I can play on the beat with the thumb. And that's great because that emphasizes the backbeat, right? The 2 and the 4. So now we've got kind of kick and snare, right? Kick and snare. Like gong, ksh, gong, ksh. And by kind of accenting the offbeats, by accenting the 2 and 4, I mean, we can get a bit of a groove. So if I start to sing over this, it was down by old Joe's barroom, on the corner by the square. They were serving drinks as usual, and the usual crowd was there. Now you're going to get sick of that in your face, right? But I'm exaggerating it to just show like that's enough of a groove to hold it together. Now the other thing you can do is, now the super duper musical term for this is subdivision, right? Like you're dividing, you're going to subdivide or divide more beyond the downbeats, beyond the 1, 2, 3, 4. And so when you're playing just 1, 2, and 3, and 4, then 2 and 4 are the supposed offbeats or weak beats, right? But in blues and jazz and other kinds of roots music, you emphasize the 2 and the 4. That's where the groove is. That's what makes it swing when it's just 1, 2, 3, 4. Now within that, you can divide it into the downbeats and the offbeats, the ones and the ands, you know? Now my kick and snare are my 1 and 3 on a note that you're really hearing, and a 2 and 4 on a faking the 4th, right? So now I've taken this and I've reduced it down to something I can do with just my thumb, right? So now the thumb's holding down the whole groove, the whole kick and snare. So use my index finger free for stuff, which is the offbeats. The offbeats of, I keep using the term offbeat two different ways. So again, when you've just got 1, 2, 3, and 4, then 2 and 4 are the offbeats. When you're going to divide that up, now it's the ands that are the offbeats. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. You can think of the offbeats as just, low person on the totem pole, right? If you're just playing 1, 2, 3, 4, then 2 and 4 are the weak beats. If you're playing 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, now 1, 2, 3, and 4 are the strong beats, and all the ands are the weak beats. So whatever is like, it's sort of a shifting territory of what the weak beats are. But the weak beats are the ones that are on the less emphasized, in the less emphasized places. If you've only got 1, 2, 3, and 4, then 2 and 4 are weak. If you've got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, then 1, 2, 3, 4 are strong, and all the ands are weak. So the ironic thing about it is that in roots music, the weak beats are really important. They're kind of like, it's like if you're a really good chess player, then all the pawns are super important. So they tell me I suck at chess. But, the weak beats are where the groove is. So now I've got my kick and snare like this. And now and the way that I let the ands either be tight rhythmically or let them ring out has to do with the groove too. So now I can sing over that. It was down by old Joe's barroom on the corner by the square. So here's the next thing, right? So I'm adjusting for the chords as I go. And you can also brush up with the index finger to get another voice. And you might do that where the voice is resting. It was down by old Joe's barroom on the corner by the square. Letting the guitar out a little bit as a counterbalance to the vocal. And then, like I was mentioning, you might end up using the high strings, again, in between the vocals. Down by old Joe's barroom on the corner by the square. We were serving drinks as usual, and the usual crowd was there. Right? So you've got these kind of degrees of building up the groove, but you start by, just losing the melody, basically, and then getting into the bass and looking at what you can do rhythmically to provide groove with as few elements as possible. So the bass and the offbeats and that, fake fourth string. Getting in the index finger, that's like the third level on the offbeats, and using it for some little chord brushes up. Getting the third and the fourth string. The third and the fourth string. And then bringing in the high string in between the lyrics. And that lets you do all that. And you can keep sort of shifting it around, and, you can have some of those different bass lines, and, the bass can do the fills too. Let her go, God bless her, wherever she may be. She can travel the wide world over and never find another man like me. Right? Because you're free in between. And I think, this just sounds good because it's a very fundamental kind of call and response between the vocal and the guitar. But it's also on a practical level. I don't know which comes first, chicken or the egg here, because probably it's easier to do fancy guitar things when you stop singing. right? So idiomatically, that kind of sounds good, but it also makes sense. It's like, oh, well, yeah, when you stop singing, you can focus on the guitar for a second and play a cool bass line or stick a lick in or, play a slide guitar lick or whatever people were doing when they were busy inventing this. So, okay, so that's a few thoughts about accompanying vocals, and more on this at the end of the session. But next month, we're going to do a series of special topics for live streams. I find that every 4 or 5 months, it's a good idea to just kind of give everybody a month to kind of catch up and not do a new song in the 6th month, or I guess if you just joined in the summer, it's not the 6th month. But, if you want to have a little time to go back and either like finish learning a song you've been working on, or, kind of dial in some of the exercises, or go back and look at a tune from the archive you haven't worked on in a while, or that you haven't gotten to work on yet. So I find it's good to have a month like that, but I also it's a chance to do something that is sort of outside of the regular routine. And so I'll do a live stream. I'll do 4 live streams for next month. And one of them will be focusing specifically on this. So I can get into maybe, how to do this on some of the different tunes we've been working on. And or address other questions that you've got, because this is kind of a quick blitz through the idea. So anyway, next question. Ray asked, in improvisation exercise number 6, why aren't the A minor 6 and E7 chords called diminished chords? So I think it was this. And the answer is, this is, now we do have this shape, right? But this note is just a melodic note. It's not part of the chord. It's what is technically referred to as a chromatic neighbor tone. And all that means is that it's a neighbor tone is a note that's right next to a note that belongs to the chord you're on. So in this case, a chromatic neighbor tone. So the note's above and the note below the note we're talking about, which is E at the moment. Okay, because we're going from E to this note and then back to E. So this is a neighbor tone, and it's a note we're visiting and coming back from. And it's called a chromatic neighbor tone because it's chromatic. It's a half step below. It's not in the scale. Right? It should be D natural, but it's D sharp. And so it's a chromatic note. It's a half step below the note in question. So this note doesn't really count except as a melody note. It doesn't count as a chord tone in this chord. So that's why this is really just an A minor 6 chord, because this note doesn't count towards the total harmony, because it's just, we hear it in passing as a neighbor. So that leaves us with the root A and the 6 and the flat 3 and the root. So it's an A minor 6 chord. Now here, this, we do have an E root, and we have the 5th, and we have the flat 7, and we have the 3rd. So that makes for a nice tidy E7, except we have this F here. This is the flat 9. Now, yeah, this by itself is a diminished chord. You could call it F diminished, or you could name it for any of the other 3 notes, because diminished chords are symmetrical, meaning they are the same. It's the same distance between all of the intervals in the chord. So any one of these notes could be considered the root. However, the lowest note in the voicing trumps everything. So if you've got an E, you could say this is an F diminished chord all day long, but as soon as your ear hears this E in the bass, this note is so much lower, it's more than an octave below this F here, that your ear says, nah, this is the foundation of the chord. I'm going to think of everything as how does this relate to this note? So what are we piling up on top of this note? And the first note you hear above that note is an F. It doesn't sound like the root anymore. It sounds like the flat 9. And so we're off to the races. This is the flat 9. This still sounds like the 5th, the flat 7, and the 3rd. So your ear says, oh, this is an E7 with something funny in it. And the funny thing is the F, which is the flat 9, because if you were playing the notes of the scale, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, and so on. Then the second, well, if you're starting here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is the ninth note up from the root. But we're not playing that note, we're playing this note. So it's been taken down a half step or flatted. So we call this the flat 9. So that's why that is not considered in the moment. This isn't for all the world a diminished voicing, but in context, it is providing the sound of an E7 flat 9 chord. So yeah, it's a diminished voicing on top of an E bass, but it's functioning, this whole chord, the totality of this sound is functioning as an E7 chord with a flat 9. So I hope that makes sense. And now on to Anton's question, which is also Henriette's question. And I didn't write down the whole question. It was a very well phrased and in-depth question, but I just kind of wrote down the essentials of it. And Anton said, thinking in terms of chord and scale degrees versus note names. So it's because when I'm doing lessons, I usually call out like I just did. I'm like, well, that's the flat 9 and that's the 5th and the flat 7 and 3rd. And so the question was basically, is that how I organize the fingerboard in my head rather than note names? And would that be more efficient because the same things, the intervals would hold true from key to key? Because if you move a chord around, it's going to have the same intervals. And the answer is basically, yeah, that's what I do and that's why I do it. Because if I just put my hand down here and have to figure out what the notes are, I can do it, but I have to think. And I have to think, well, are we thinking, is this a B flat or are we thinking it's an A sharp? Probably a B flat. Okay, so that's B flat, that's F, that I guess we're going to call A flat then, and that we're going to call D. But that doesn't really help me so much as an improviser, because what I really want to know is, if I'm in B flat and I want to improvise, how do I spell out the 3rd? I go there. And what I care about is that that's the 3rd, because that tells me I can slide into it from a blue note. And if this is the flat 7, the intervals kind of tell me where the good notes are. I look at the improvisation choices as coming out of the chord tones. So if I know I'm here and this is the 3rd and this is the flat 7, I know where the root is up here even though I'm not playing it, because the root's always right above the flat 7. And the 5th also has a blue note right below it, the flat 5. So now I know this shape and I know, oh, cool. And if someone says, oh, not so bluesy, then I can go, oh, well, let me take this flat 7 down to the 6 and use the major second instead of the sharp 9 or the flat 3rd. And if they say, no, 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 a little less Allman Brothers, please, then I can split the difference and say, well, let me keep in the 6, but put in the flat 3rd. And if they like wanted to continue in that direction, like, yeah, okay, so even less Allman Brothers. Now we can have the flat 7 and the flat 3rd, but also the 6th. And if I want to go somewhere else and go down the neck, now I'm into this shape. And it's the same deal. Here's the root, and here's the 3rd, and here's the 5th. So I can get, if they're like, well, I want it down an octave. If someone says, I like that, but I want it down an octave. I don't know who this person is. It's totally hypothetical. No one's ever asked me to do this, but me, to myself. But if someone says, well, I like that, but where can you get it down an octave? I'm like, well, this is just going into the flat 3rd to the 3rd, and the root down to the flat 7. And if I'm in this triad shape, and that's the 3rd and that's the root, then all the same stuff applies. Flat 3 to 3, root to flat 7. Cool. They're like, no, even lower. I'm like, even lower. Well, let's see. How about that shape? Okay. All right, that's the closest I'll ever get to playing anything that sounds like Hendrix, and it's not very close. But there's my flat 3rd, my 3rd, and there's my root, and there's my flat 7, or there. So I like the fact that I didn't have to sit and think about the names of any of those notes. I just had to think about shapes. Not that knowing the notes is bad. I mean, and I know objectively if I'm in B flat, that I'm talking about D flat to, whatever. What am I talking about? I'm talking about, D flat to D, and then B flat down to A flat. But that's just not really how I think about it. I think about it if I have to write it out, or I have to communicate with someone else, or, I'm trying to voice things so that someone else can deal with them. But if I'm just playing the guitar, then I want to think about shapes, because shapes and intervals, not just shapes. Because just thinking about shapes will get you into trouble, because you need to know what the shapes stand for, right? But I do see it in terms of, well, there's that shape. That gives you the third and the root and the fifth, and I like that. So yeah, if you can, if you're looking for a way in to knowing the notes on the fingerboard, there's only really 3 triad shapes on the top 3 strings. And they look like parts of chords you already know. Right? That's just a garden variety D chord. That's the top of this chord, or you can think of it as an A chord shape moved up. And then this is the top of an E chord moved up. Which makes sense because we're on D right now, and E would be here, right? Which looks like this. So then same thing on the next string. There's only 3 shapes. Let's do it in A. Here's A, and here's A, and here's the one that's hard to remember. There's A. So there's that. And so there's just those 3 shapes. And those 3, if you're playing fingerstyle guitar, those are the 2 sets that matter. Because it doesn't matter if you can, the third set is to do these guys, the Freddie Green chords. I'm not going to get into that right now. That's a whole other ball of wax. But basically, and they connect up. Like this is part of this, and this is part of that, and this is part of that. And once you know the triads, then you can find the sevenths, you can find the minor versions. These 6 shapes are super powerful, because if you know this, then you know this. And if you know this, then you know this. And if you know this, then you know, well, where's the best place to get this? If you know this, then you know this. And if you know this, then you know that. And if you know this, then you know that, and so on. So those triads really help, because if you know just where all the roots, thirds, and fifths are in a little map, then you can find anything you need, both in terms of chords and in terms of improvising. Did I learn those shapes with Caged? I really didn't. I learned them because I had a guitar teacher named Tom Ross who was teaching me 4-note voicings. And in particular, like 6th voicings, which are really hard on the guitar. So like, if you want a C6 chord, I can't even do it right now because it's kind of hurting my fingers. But there it would be, right? And I was like, well, where's the next one? He said, well, just take every note, just go up to the next note of the chord on each string. So if this is the root, go up to the 3rd. If this is the 5th, go up to the 6th. If this is the 6th, go up to the root. And if this is the 3rd, go up to the 5th. So you go from here to, I gotta think about it. What is it? Shoot. There it is. So there's C6. Here's the root. I would never think of this voicing in a million years. And then the next one, let's see. And then, so here's the next one. So now we've got, I can't remember this one. Okay, this one. There it is. And there's going to be one more up here that I can't really reach. But so I thought, well, that's interesting. And so I just started looking at something simpler the same way, which was, okay, if this is D, where's the next note of D on this string? Well, it's here. And where's the next note of D on this string? Well, it's here. So that gets you from here to here. And then again, that's all there is. You're out, because the next one's going to be up here again. So triads are not that hard. They're a lot easier than 4-note chords, because there's only 3 notes. And the top note on the top string is going to make an arpeggio. It's going to restate the chord in a linear way. And so is this. And so is this. But that's why you can find, that's what those steel guitar players are doing. What is it? I'm trying to play San Antonio Rose, and it's not going very well. So I'll work on that for next time. But anyway, so that's triads, or the fingerboard, actually. There's more to say about that, too. That might be one of the special topics also. Okay. How are we doing on time? We're running out. I have a few more questions I will try to get to. How to understand. Okay, this is a big question. Let me just see if I can blow through these other 4 things really quickly. Paul asked about my right hand nails, use and maintenance. It's funny because I was, I'm all excited that my wrist is getting better. And then I went to put something away in the fridge and I smashed my thumbnail into something stupid. And it's a lot shorter than it usually is. But I keep the left hand really short, but long enough that it supports the skin. And kind of the same thing on the right hand. I keep the right hand pretty short, but long enough to support the skin. I don't play with my nails. I play with the skin. So it looks like, I don't know if you can see, but it's like that. It's not, it's the skin. This is stupid. You can't really see anything. But it's the skin is reaching in under the string and grabbing it. Like the string's right here, basically. Right about there, So all I do is let them grow and then file them. So they're just kind of, so that there's no snags and no edges. And so that the part of the nail that the nail does touch the string, but it's not like a classical guitar player where the nail's the only thing touching the string. But what matters is kind of like that there's a rounded edge to the nail so that nothing catches and so that it kind of slides off the string instead of, catching on the string like that. And that's really all there is to it. My nails are the envy of the women in my family. They are relatively thick and relatively strong, and they don't tend to get too messed up until I do something stupid and tear them or whatever. And I try to keep them, that's another reason I try to keep them relatively filed and smooth, is so they don't catch on things. But, the story is that Chet Atkins wore gloves, like rubber gloves, in the shower, because when nails get wet, they're more vulnerable, and he was really into his nails. That was a big part of his sound, and so he was super protective of his hands and his nails. Okay, so that's the nails. I can go on about that if you want, but that's really all I got to say about nails. There's not much to it. Steve asked if we're in A minor. Oh, wait, that's a little bit longer question. That's going to go with this other one at the end. Ben asked about avoiding the F chord. And there's no real good way. At a certain point, if you want to be able to do fingerstyle in A minor or C, at some point you have to reckon with the F and the thumb and all that. Now, I know that some people just physically, for whatever reason with their hands, there's issues and they can't actually get it down. But the only real workaround in this tune is this, which is to not use your thumb, but use your index finger for the root, your middle finger for the fifth, your ring finger for the third, and your pinky for the fourth. So, and that actually is what I used to do a lot because I wasn't hip to this at all. But here's what I will say about playing with the thumb on the F. When done comfortably, it shouldn't be really any harder than anything else that you do. And if you look at my hand going from a C to an F, if you look at my arm and my elbow, nothing's really happening. And my shoulder, there's none of this, none of that, nothing's going anywhere. And the thumb is not coming around like that or anything. It's just the thumb is sitting here minding its own business, and when needed, it goes like that. And so the pressure is happening between the ball of your index finger and the thumb just hooking down like that. It's this kind of motion. So what's going on is that if you play like most non-classical and jazz guitar players do, with the guitar kind of in the crook of your hand, with the ball of your hand resting on this side and your thumb resting here, then your thumb's already where it belongs. And so all you have to do is get this kind of fleshy part of your thumb to hook over just a little bit. It's just enough to grab it. And when you just catch a little bit of that string and and push against, use this as a lever to push against, just kind of squeeze a little tighter, there's the note. And so to go from C to F involves literally this much of a shift. That's all it should take. Now that will take practice, and it is kind of a pain in the neck if you're not used to it and not comfortable with it, but it can be done. So I would say use this for now if you got to, but work on this and just making that little shift between those two positions. Okay. And then this is the last short question, and this is such an obvious one for me, and I haven't done it yet, and Dave asked, kind of post the improvisations with the rest of the month's material is basically what it comes down to. And the answer is yeah, and I've been promising to do that for a couple of months, so let me make sure that happens as soon as I can. That's perfectly reasonable. Okay, so last two things were about are there things we can do at the 5th fret and how to understand the turnaround. And the turnaround's kind of a huge question, so let me talk a little bit about the 5th fret and then a little bit about the turnaround. I don't want this to end up being like incredibly long. So 5th fret. Yeah, so if you're in A, your only limitation in terms of the 5th fret is how are you going to take care of the bass. So if you're cool with this faking the 4th string, you can bar the top 3 strings and let the tip of your finger touch the 4th string. And now, you can play kind of like, sort of electric guitar pentatonic licks almost. This E, because your thumb's got the 4th string right here. And this is nice because it lets you do those kind of licks, like those Charlie Christian tritones. And it lets you do these kind of those kinds of things. Thumb is just kind of hitting that dead string on the 4th string. I'm kind of an open position guy, so I don't tend to use that as much, but there it is if you want to experiment with that. Also, this position is nice too. So here's the root, and here's the 5th and the 7th. And these are kind of like, I think of these as more like electric guitar vocabulary. But hammering on from the 4th to the 5th, getting the flat 7 over here. And so there's all of that, right? So if you're coming out of... So that's kind of how that might unfold. Okay, last question. How to understand the turnaround. And this was from Robert, and I think in the context he was asking more about sitting on top of the world. But I will talk just a little bit. Sort of brings it full circle. So we were talking about the vamp at the beginning. But so really, if you're doing this as an 8-bar tune, last 2 bars really. There's other possibilities. Right, so for the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to think of the turnaround as just what to do over bars 7 and 8, right? And that could be F to E to A. It could be D to E to A. It could be B7 to E7 to A. It could be this doesn't really fit with this tune, but it could be B minor 7 flat 5 to E with an altered sound back to A. And all of those are just different chord substitutions for what's basically 5 to 1. And so the logic of why can you choose those notes and what are they doing is just different ways of dressing up 5 to 1, or really 1 to 5 to 1, because that's in the most straightforward way of thinking about the melody. Right? Just A minor, E7, A minor. So in one case, we're thinking backwards from the E. What's the 5 of E? B7. That's the 5 of E. E is the 5 of A minor. So we can have another way to think about it is, well, okay, B7 is the 5 of E. E is the 5 of A. That takes us back. What can we substitute for B7? Well, we can substitute F7. And so now we've got F7 to E7 to A minor. We could think about the D7 as being the 4 chord setting up the 5 chord to 1, because 4, 5, 1 is a nice resolution. And so that would work. So there's a few different ways to think about it. If I get, maybe, I think, sort of thinking out loud now, but maybe, and I don't want to sort of think, oh, like I'll end up with like 10 topics, right, for next month, but probably talking about every time chord substitutions come up, it ends up being a pretty lengthy conversation. So maybe that's something that I should spend some time on next month as well. But that is everything that I came with, and there were not a lot of questions posted during the stream, which is fine. And I hope you didn't feel like you couldn't post them because I was busy talking about things that had already been sent in. But if there's anything I didn't super duper get to, let me know. I'll sit here for a couple minutes and check the feed, and then we'll wrap things up. Here's one. Avoiding the F chord, I was hoping I'd bless the D minor as a workaround. Yeah, oh yeah, no, totally. D minor and F are completely related. So I mean, most more traditional versions of the song, I don't find it that much easier, but you can totally do the D minor. And certainly if you're improvising, totally cool. I don't even think of it as a possible alternative, because I find that putting the bass all the way up to the 4th and 3rd string kind of awkward, but it's totally cool. I mean, I tend to play D minors like this, which doesn't help at all because now we're still playing the thumb, right? But here's the 3rd, the flat 3rd, and the 5th, and the root of D minor. But yeah, that's totally fine. Totally have the go ahead to play D minor as far as I'm concerned. Okay. Well, let me play just a little bit more of St. James Infirmary, and then we will skedaddle. Okay. Well, I remembered a couple things I forgot to talk about, but that's going to have to be it because we're done. So, thanks so much for being here. And if you're watching this on the replay, post your comments and questions below. And next week, we will start these Special Topic Live streams. And so I'll see you on the forum. Keep posting your versions of tunes and your questions. And